Welcome to the Bleep Bulimia podcast with author Mallary Tenore Tarpley, author of Slip. Hi, everyone. I am Lorianne. I am the host of Bleep Bulimia, and today my special guest is Mallary Tenore Tarpley, and she is a journalism professor at the University of Texas at Austin and author of the memoir Slip. And I love the um, the follow to the title, Life in the Middle of Eating Disorder Recovery. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, as is my
So,
usual, I want to know a little bit about your background, and definitely I know my readers will want to know more about your book. So, please tell us about yourself.
great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. And I will give you the Cliff Notes version of my story, and then you can feel free to ask any related questions. But my lived experience with an eating disorder dates back to childhood. So I developed anorexia nervosa when I was 12, shortly after my mother died of metastatic breast cancer. And when she died, I did not know how to handle her death other than to pretend that I was okay. And so I went to school the day after she died and I read the eulogy at her funeral without shedding any tears. But behind that happy facade, I really felt like my whole world was crumbling. And the more time passed, the farther I felt from my mother. And so, as a 12-year-old, I conjured up this idea that maybe if I were able to artificially stop time and stay the same size I was when my mom was alive, I could somehow be closer to her. And I was getting some of these ideas too because I was taking a health class at the time where the teacher was teaching us about good foods and bad foods and telling us what we should and shouldn't eat. So I was learning at that age that I could change the way my body looked depending on what I put inside of it. And so for me, food restriction was never about trying to be skinny, but more so about trying to be small and safe. And so I restricted my food intake, and it very quickly descended into an eating disorder. I was diagnosed with anorexia at age 13 and was hospitalized and spent most of my teenage years in and out of the hospital and residential treatment. And then I was in a period for about 2 years during my junior and senior years of high school where I thought I was fully recovered, but didn't really know exactly what that meant. And I ended up relapsing in college and falling into this vicious cycle of binge eating and restricting, which lasted for about 10 years. And in my late 20s, I really began to reshape my thinking around recovery and to think of it less as a perfectionistic ideal, but more as an ongoing work in progress. And I began to question what would it mean if rather than letting every slip turn into a slide, I were able to look at slips as opportunities for growth. And so in thinking that way, I came to describe my recovery as a middle place, which is this name I've given to this liminal space between acute sickness and full recovery. And it's a space where I've lived out my life. It's a space where recovery is possible, but slips happen and slips and progress can coexist. And so my book really speaks to this middle place and it blends my own lived experience with anorexia alongside perspectives from other people with all different types of eating disorders and insights from clinicians and researchers. And my hope is that this book will help people who are in this middle place to feel seen and heard, and that it will broaden conversations around the messiness and imperfection of recovery, knowing that yes, recovery is possible, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
I like that. And it's so true because when somebody is proceeding forth and they sit there and they'll say, wow, 60 days without, and then they slip. And that slip can be a fall, right?
Yeah.
And I love what you're saying is because it doesn't have to be a fall. It's just a slip and trip and get back. You're up. You're still there, right? It's like very, very encouraging. Um, so sorry to hear about your story about your mom, and it's a different aspect of anorexia where you were trying to stay small. It's interesting that you're aware of that. Um, I think that there's a lot of people who struggle with anorexia or bulimia who cannot define. the actual why am I doing this? That
Yes, it was really through recovery and also through writing about my story that I was able to make sense of that all. Certainly being in treatment helped, but I often make sense of the world through writing. And just as a writer, I was really intrigued by this idea of what is the origin story of my eating disorder. I think I needed to really unpack that in order to understand what the eating disorder served and why I fell for the eating disorder, to speak, but also to really sort of recognize all that it threatened to take away.
so in your so if we can expand on the slip in your own experience. Uh, so like you said, 10 years, I'm not sure the full, like I was telling you, I was 30 years of on and off and struggling um with recovery. And my final recovery came pretty quick, but it was almost like slapping me in the face, something, and it just happened. Like, why are you doing this? There's no reason. You have no excuses. Not that excuses are good, but there are certain things that can trigger an eating disorder. Whereas I had none of those triggers left, and I'm going, yo, like now it's just a habit, right? Get rid of the habit.
Mm.
Um, in your case, how is this processing moving forward? And you were talking about like not really fully recovering, but being in that middle place. I'd really like to know more about that.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to talk about because for the longest time, I thought that the only way I could share my story was if I was fully recovered. And I didn't think I could write a book unless I was fully recovered. But I recognize that I have tried reaching full recovery for most of my life, and I don't feel like I've ever arrived at that place. And so I'm much more interested in thinking about what does this life in the middle place look like? And I find myself in this middle place, not because I am not trying to work at my recovery. I think that that's a misconception that people in this place are just settling for stagnancy or they're not trying hard enough. I mean, I have been in recovery for over 25 years, but I still see a therapist. I still see a dietitian because I want to be able to talk about those slips when they happen. I recognize, for instance, that if I am having a particularly stressful stretch at work, inclination is to restrict my food intake. And those thoughts will come up. And sometimes those thoughts do end up leading to some food restriction. But whereas years ago, I would have really just ended up restricting my food intake to the point where I needed medical help, I can now sort of look at, okay, I restricted during breakfast, for instance, doesn't mean that I need to now be on a path of restriction for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, right? How can I get back on track at lunchtime? I think it's so easy to just say, well, next week I'll start, or the next day I'll start. And I've had to really think of the immediacy of this and to think about, I slipped. Why did I slip? How can I get back up now in this moment rather than delaying it? Because often when we continue to sort of delay the slippage and when we sort of put it off, the questioning around it, that's when those slips can very often turn into slides. And so for me, it's been really important to shed the secrecy around slips. And it can be so difficult to talk to someone around slips, but I try to confide in my husband, for instance, my therapist, my dietitian, just so that I am not letting the eating disorder and its imprints thrive in secrecy. Because I know that when it thrives in that secrecy, that's what keeps me stuck. And that's what really prevents me from making progress in the middle place.
That's really interesting. Thriving in secrecy. It is so true. I mean, it's amazing how you can be a very honest person, very caring person, and yet be the biggest liar, really, when it comes to an eating disorder. Um, it went against all my values too, and that's another conflict, like an internal conflict when that's not that's not me, but it is me because this is how I'm doing it. That secrecy, yeah. And once you're out, it becomes yeah, harder to just hide in those secrets. I am it's interesting to speak of it because I wrote a book prior to me being in full recovery. And I actually ended up writing it after my full recovery. I updated it and put it out there. But I felt the same way as you. I go, oh no, I can't put this out there. And had I been, I like that you're being honest because I could have said, hey, this is what's working, but it hasn't finished working yet. Um, and then the
Yes.
other thing, I had a client on my um, on a podcast. I think it was she didn't speak to her. She was bulimic, but didn't speak to it on my podcast, which I found interesting. But she was very interesting anyway. But she wouldn't bring that up. Not that she didn't mind bringing it up, it just didn't come up for some reason. But she did talk to me afterwards, and she said, she still has, even she's been fully recovered, quote unquote, for about, I think it was 8 years or something. But she says there's still characteristics of the eating disorder in her.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, there are times where, yes, I see my characteristics of my bulimia pop up again. Um, I think it was 5 years after I had 100% stopped throwing up, but I wasn't 100% out of here. And I was doing work for my sister, and I hated doing it. And first thing I wanted to do was go get food and eat through it because I liked eating and I hated doing what I do. And it was like a sidekick. And I went, whoa, no, awareness, right? And so I quit. I said, I can't do this because I could feel that little bulimia pulling me over there. And I went, ah, but the awareness of it
Hmm.
was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
I feel like that makes such a big difference to just be aware and to recognize that about yourself as opposed to just kind of pathologizing or stigmatizing those thoughts when they naturally come up. And I think that so often we do that because we think, well, we're supposed to be better. We're not supposed to have any of those thoughts or those characteristics, or we think that we need to get rid of our traits and our temperament in order to get better. And I used to really think, oh, I can't be a perfectionist if I'm going to be fully recovered. But we really can't rid ourselves of our traits. And this is something I talk about in the book. And a lot of people with eating disorders do share the same temperament traits. So people with anorexia tend to be risk averse and they tend to have lower sensitivity to reward. But really, recovery is not about ridding ourselves of our traits, but really learning how to express them more productively than destructively. So that's something I've also had to think through a lot in recovery.
I like that you can go to your husband. I think that that is very special. I've been quite intrigued over the last 4 years of doing this podcast about how many spouses are supportive, but there's also some that aren't, and it's not that they don't want to be, is that they fear and they don't want to understand it. They they don't understand it, or any one of those. My ex was one of those. I asked him to come to therapy with me and he refused. I would have really liked him to be there to learn more about what I was going through, why this might be happening. I don't know 100%, but my it was actually a psychiatrist that I was hiring to do this. Um, he might have heard the saying that, he says, you're like a China doll. He says, cold on the outside, but very fragile. And I thought that that was
Mm,
really, really cute. So,
yeah.
yeah, you're very lucky. Support, I think, is really a big key as well. Um,
It is. And I think the more you can seek that support, the more you can also ask for the type of help you need, because it's true that eating disorders are so enigmatic and it can be really difficult to understand, both for people struggling with them, but also for their loved ones. And so I think the more that we can tell people the type of help we need, the better prepared they can be to intervene and offer that support because otherwise, they may be trying to help us in a way that feels judgmental or accusatory, and that may not be their intent, but maybe that's how we feel about it. And that may shut us down. And so I think part of it is also being really clear about what type of help do you need, right? What kind of support is going to be most meaningful for you?
and again, a reason for this podcast, I bring on different people, different types of ways of being able to heal. So hoping that my listeners, somebody out there can connect with someone. I really believe that they definitely will be able to connect with your book, those who are in the middle of recovery. And I would imagine it wouldn't matter what kind of eating disorder, though, because we all, like, whether it's overeating, anorexia, bulimia, although they're different, a lot of the emotional connections are similar to you're associated with food in a way that's, food should be your friend. And
Mhm.
I made it my
Yes.
friend. It was like, well, it was my friend in a wrong way. It was like when I was eating too much of it, but it was funny because it was like this voice, and I know I sound weird, like this voice in my food saying, "This is not how you're supposed to be my friend. Like, you're abusing
Yes.
me," right? And my body, same thing. When I learned that, yeah, I'm so comfortable around food now. It what's the word, behooves me that I spent 30 years being afraid of it and yet it being my best friend at the same time. Like, if that makes any sense at all. Because if you go to a
Mm,
party or there's stuff, you're scared going, oh my gosh, I know there's gonna be food there. Um,
right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't have that anymore. And to the comment that my previous podcast guest said that there are characteristics, I would probably say so. I still really shy away from really fatty foods, but the other thing too is my system doesn't like taking fatty foods anyway. So I'm kind of mixed. Is it because your body doesn't like it, or is it because you still have those fears of trigger foods? I don't know, but I can see
Yes.
where that can still happen. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think about vegetarianism because I am still a vegetarian and I've written essays about the fact that I've really had to grapple with why am I a vegetarian? And certainly part of it is just the animal ethics. Part of it is that I didn't grow up really eating meat. My dad would cook well done steaks with mounds of ketchup on top and dry pork chops with applesauce. So I never really particularly liked meat. But also, when I was sick, not eating meat was a form of restriction. And in some ways, if I'm really honest with myself, I think it is still a socially acceptable way of restricting food intake. And so, that, for instance, is sort of this lingering imprint of my eating disorder that I've not been able to shake. But I think it's really important to always sort of think through that. And maybe at some point I will begin eating meat again. I am not opposed to that possibility. I've not been able to get there yet. But a lot of these choices we make around food are really complicated. And it, to use your word, behooves us to really be honest about, well, why are we making these choices around food? And are they still serving us in the ways that we want them to? So that's something I often contend with when it comes to vegetarianism, because all other food I try to eat freely. I try really hard not to place restrictions on my food intake.
Your husband a vegetarian too?
No, he is a Texas meat eating aficionado.
Well, that was the other
Yeah.
thing too. You're speaking of restricting meat. I used to restrict red meat. It was fish and chicken only, right? So like now it's like, hey, give me a steak. It's like, so I passed over that. Chips I can eat now, whereas I was so afraid because that was like not just a trigger food, but like I finished the whole bag now. And so I'm comfortable in most places. And I'm really literally saying, do I really like this? What I used to like it as a child, why don't I like it now? It could be just that my taste buds have changed. I don't question it
Mhm.
anymore though, but at the beginning I did a lot of it, like, why am I not eating this? Is this my trigger? I want to get over it. I want to move forward. I want to get to the point where I'm so comfortable that I can go and sit at somebody's place for dinner and they offer me something and I'm not scared to eat it. And that's
Yeah.
where I got to. But I would imagine that slip point, there would still be for some people that anxiety, um,
Mhm.
on the bulimia side, or even the restricting side, right? So, I love it. I love it. Where can people find you? Where can they get your book? I know it's all over the place, but oh, you said it's coming out?
Yes, so it'll be out August 5th, but for anyone who may be listening to this before then, it's available for pre-order and you can find it on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble's website. Come August 5th, it will be in bookstores. And it's my story, but it's also the narratives of lots of other people. So I interviewed hundreds of people, surveyed over 700 people with lived experience because I didn't want this to just be my story alone. I really wanted to bring in perspectives from other people with different types of eating disorders. So my hope is that listeners will find points of relatability in it.
No, I don't doubt they will. I really super appreciate you being here. Um, and I will have the link posted below. So listeners, if you are watching this, there are the notes and I will have the link for you to find Mallary. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Love it. You're the first for talking about a middle zone for recovery. So I really think this is very much needed. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been lovely.
Thank you. Great day. Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit me at bleepbulimia.com.